Today on CityCast DC. So normally this episode would wait until Wednesday, but there's big news in DC, and we're going to drop it a little bit early. The news is that Muriel Bowser, the mayor of Washington, has announced she is going to hang it up after 12 years in office. And we want to know what happens now, and what should we make of the decade plus that Herronner has spent dominating DC politics. I'm here with CityCast's Bridget Todd and WAMU's Alex Koma. Today is still Tuesday, November 25th. I'm Michael Schaffer, and here's what DC's talking about. Hey, Bridget.
Hey, Mike.
Hey, Alex. Good to see you.
Hello. Same.
So you guys, as you may have heard, Muriel Bowser, the mayor of Washington, is not running again. Alex, you cover City Hall. How did she come to this decision?
Yeah, well, it's one that we've been talking about on this show, on our airwaves at WAMU for some time. It is, while still shocking, it's the end of an era for DC politically. It is not the biggest surprise for those of us who have been, sort of checking in with the mayor and her people. The fact that she has had to deal with things that, any other DC mayor really would not have to in the president's unprecedented intervention in the city's affairs has had a tremendous amount to do with this. I think that is the first and perhaps last thing that will get mentioned about this time in her tenure. But there's lots of other things, too. She has a young daughter to take care of that she certainly has not been able to spend much time with. She's accomplished a good many of the things that she set out to do, as highlighted by the fact that she was just able to get the Washington Commanders to move back into D.C. on top of all of the other stuff she's been working on for the last, 12 years or so. So it is certainly the case that the Trump factor is maybe the first and most urgent thing, in that it has diminished her standing among, at least some part of her Democratic base, but also just been kind of a pain for her to deal with. Add in the fact that she's done all this stuff. I mean, why stick around? It's something that some of us have been asking basically since the moment Trump won re-election, and now we've reached the sort of natural conclusion here, which is she's not running again.
Here's a question that I have for both of you. What do you make of this timing? It's late on a Tuesday before Thanksgiving holiday weekend. It has very big Friday news dump energy. Most of us were sort of thinking about logging off, and then some of us log back on to have this breaking news conversation. What do we make of this timing?
I'd been picking up from people, who are around the mayor or purport to know her thinking. And it's really gone back and forth. A lot of people were saying, look, it is not a foregone conclusion that she would run again. It's, for all the reasons Alex just laid out. There's a thanklessness to it. There's 12 years. It's been a remarkably scandal-free 12 years for her personally. And go out on top and all that sort of stuff. And I had assumed that we would learn, sometime towards the end of the year. Earlier this week, I was on one of the socials and I got that AstroTurf ad seeking to draft Muriel Bowser, please run again. And it was pretty clearly some sort of business interest paid a lot for this ad. And that was the thing that made me think oh, she's, someone knows she's made a decision or is very close to a decision, and they're trying to push her.
Yeah, I think that, she since she told the Post that draft Muriel Bowser, which is a very funny thing. How can you draft a sitting mayor to run for something? Yeah, that was put together by Opportunity DC, which is sort of a creature of the very influential federal city council, big developers, business interests in the city. And yeah, I saw the same thing, Mike, and thought, this is a sign that if we weren't sure that she was giving really serious thought to not running again before, boy, oh boy, is this a sign now? And I think really the timing itself in sort of the micro is surprising to people. I, like most people, assumed that she would do us all a solid and wait until after the Thanksgiving holiday to do this. But, from a PR perspective, there's no other news going on in town. So I think her people knew that if you wanted to sort of seize the airwaves, this was kind of your last moment before everybody took off to go get in a turkey coma. And she seized it. She's getting the spotlight right now and presumably will go relax for like a week or whatever, knowing that there will be a little less pressure on her as everyone is away. So not the worst timing for her, all things considered.
The thing that strikes me, though, Alex, and it's you pick up from a lot of lefty critics of the mayor, people you've quoted over the years, that, in their view, she is nothing but a creature of big business, and she's bought and paid for by the business lobby. But in fact, I think a lot of corporate interests would very much like her to serve another term, and they actually didn't succeed at getting her to do that. And one of the people I talked to was like, "Where were these guys 6 months?" I mean, the moment to put the pressure on her was before it was too late. So. I think it sort of complicates the lefty narrative about her, too.
Well, and I think it's the case that they absolutely have been putting pressure on her. They're just not normally paying for social media ads to do it. I mean, just in my conversations that I've been having, there's in the business community writ large, among the people who, as you say, would very much have preferred to see her run again because they are very familiar with her record of, shall we say, delivering on their priorities. They've been wondering, they've been asking her, they've been saying, like, what is the deal? Are we planning a campaign here? Like, if so, we need to know to be able to, even though you're the sitting mayor and you have all these advantages of a well-known incumbent, we still need to be able to put together the bedrock of a campaign. Who's going to donate? Who's going to run it? What is this going to look like? What is the vision you want us to be selling to people for the next 4 years? And they were just getting a lot of radio silence, a lot of uncertainty. And so I think that shows you that this was as much a personal decision as a political one with a lot of this stuff. You just encountered a lot of weariness when you would talk to people. I mean, I don't discount the fact that she's had a lot of advisors who were really close to her, who have been close to her for years. She's always been kind of an insular politician. And a lot of those folks are gone for one reason or another. You mentioned scandal-free. One of the biggest scandals she had was the resignation of her, closest confidant, John Falcicchio, amid a sexual harassment scandal a couple of years ago. That's
former
the
guest
guy,
of this podcast.
Yeah, he went on a lot of podcasts, and that's the kind of guy who would run that campaign. Without someone like that, there just wasn't anybody to do this kind of thing. You struck you that her heart wasn't in it this time around.
Yeah, I remember one of the last things I heard during the whole Trump takeover was the conversation about whether or not Bowser was in Martha's Vineyard for a fancy fundraising party. And she had to say, no, I was taking my kid to camp. And I feel like that instance really, illustrated what you're talking about. Just a weariness. Honestly, I can't say I don't get it.
And I think that specific incident apparently played a big role in her mind of like, this is, that she was not afforded any kind of grace or like, hey, maybe this is actually a legit need, that she's not just like popping off for some leisurely weekend. And, the thing is, when you're the mayor, you're not afforded grace, and nor should you be. I mean, our job, media, is to ask them hard questions and hold them to account and not, or at least force them to make their own excuses for themselves and not preemptively make them. But that's the job. And I can imagine after 12 years, you're 52 or 53, career in public service, it'd be nice to go make some money, hang out more with your kid, be able to go off to pick her up in Martha's Vineyard without people implying that you're somehow slacking.
The money factor is an important one here. It's not like the DC mayor is not well paid. She certainly makes more than I do. But, there has long been these rumblings around her when I've spoken to people who have talked to her about this, is that she valued the trappings of the office. Who wouldn't want a chauffeur to drive them around and make the police escort to make them feel important? You don't get that at other places. And I had multiple people mention that to me specifically. But guess what? What you do get at other places, like a big law firm, a big lobbying firm, is a paycheck that you can do much less work, do exactly the sort of things you're referring to. In fact, going to Martha's Vineyard to hang out with your lobbyist friends is in fact part of the job and not merely something that you'll get beat up for in the press. And so it's like, why wouldn't you want to make that change if you think that you could cash in that way? She's been doing this for a long time. And in fact, she's going to be on the job for another year plus. So it's not like, this is, she's some short timer. In fact, most people don't stick around to be DC mayor this long. The only person who did was Marion Barry. That was a very different political environment in DC than the one we find ourselves in now. And so when you're faced with the option of, do I want to tangle with a Republican Congress and Donald Trump for a few more years, or do I want to go make some money? I mean, it starts to become a much easier calculation when you look at it from a purely personal viewpoint. Because, of course, they're politicians, but they are people, too.
This holiday season, DC small business needs our support more than ever. That's why we're excited to tell you about the DC Holiday Hunt, a citywide scavenger hunt that makes supporting local shops and restaurants fun and rewarding. It's simple. Earn points by visiting small businesses, exploring neighborhood landmarks, answering trivia questions, and sharing your favorite holiday traditions. With over $3,000 in prizes from local DC businesses up for grabs, there has never been a better reason to explore our city. The hunt runs from November 23rd through January 3rd. Visit districtbridges.org/DC Holiday Hunt to sign up today. That's districtbridges.org/DC Holiday Hunt. Life can flip on a dime. 1 minute, everything's normal, and the next, someone else's mistake shakes your world upside down. And that's when you need a team you can count on. NACE Law Group has been standing up for DC families for decades, fighting for neighbors hurt by medical malpractice, wrongful deaths, and serious injuries. They don't just settle quickly or push papers. They dig in, fight hard, and make sure every client gets the justice they deserve. And here's something that I personally love about them. They are a longtime supporter of this very podcast. Because just like us, and just like you, they care about this community and the folks who call it home. So if you've been hurt or someone that you care about has, just pick up the phone. Call NACE Law Group. They'll stand with you, fight for your family, and make sure your rights are protected. And who knows, maybe you'll even see them at a CityCast live show. Visit WashingtonDCInjuryLawyers.com. That's WashingtonDCInjuryLawyers.com.
Now we've entered the kind of assessment stage of her mayoralty. Alex, in your reporting, what are some of the early reactions you're getting from sort of current electeds and or sort of players in the city's political fights?
Yeah, I think that for most people, if they are inclined to write a favorable political obituary for Muriel Bowser, then it's going to start and end with what she's done for sports teams in the district. You'll notice that is one of the things that she has pointed to very frequently these last few years, and certainly in some of her early retrospectives on her time here. Brought the Commanders back, which is something she's been trying to do for a decade. Kept the Wizards and Capitals here when it seemed that they were going to move to Virginia. Saw through the final construction of Audi Field and the remaining development around Nationals Park. This is the stuff that she's going to, it's what her biggest boosters always used to say is, you remember a mayor for one thing. What is the one thing going to be? For her, she would probably be pretty satisfied if that thing was got the Commanders to DC. That's going to be hard to beat.
This is also a 12-year period that coincided with the COVID and the wild disruptions to the school system, to businesses, a radical change in how people work, which affects cities that are where the main industry is offices, the disturbances in 2020. These are huge and very controversial things, in addition to the last 12 years of what has been a generation-long kind of wrenching change in DC's demographics, and one that leaves a lot of people feeling, alienation or pain or anxiety or whatever. And in addition to, like, you're the boss of like 30,000 public employees, and are they doing a good job for the people they're supposed to serve? Where are the at least the initial assessments on those kinds of things?
Yeah, as you say, those are going to be the things that, if maybe in the short term, people think about RFK, in the long term, they're going to be thinking, when they think about Muriel Bowser, about the changing face of the city, for good and for ill. She oversaw a tremendous amount of housing development and construction, such that she was a national leader in many ways on this issue at a time when cities are dealing with affordability and wondering, like, how can we see more housing production to drive down rents and allow people to live here? That is what she should rightly be remembered for, in setting bold targets for the city, in enabling the more development to happen, particularly in places east of the river that have not seen as much. However, there are flip sides to that as well, and that is what her critics will point to, which is she allowed a ton of this development, but she also continued a legacy started by her predecessor, Adrian Fenty, of a very insular city government, of one that favored, the same few developers over and over again, such that it was a punchline when you saw stories such as you did in the Washington Post just last week saying, hey, some of these guys, the most favored developers, they, got a ton more money out of the city than maybe they should have. That is going to be part of the discussion about her legacy, because that goes throughout government. She had a reputation as maybe not the most scrupulous manager, a government that certainly wasn't what it was under Barry, where it could, barely get the trash off the streets, but also one that was stultified in a lot of key ways, and that she didn't pursue people with outside expertise willing to shake up the government and pursue solutions for the same sort of inequities that all of this new development would create. So you allow a lot of new development. Are you doing a good enough job of making sure that it, actually benefits everyone throughout the city versus just the people who are already well off? That is where her critics are going to seize upon and say that she, didn't do anything different necessarily from Adrian Fenty, her political mentor, but that she, that didn't mean she did it better either.
Well, I think it goes back further than that. We've had, I don't know that Fenty represented some dramatic change. It's just that these people didn't like him very much. But Tony Williams, who's often viewed as the savior of modern Washington, there was a concerted effort to build more stuff, attract more people who can actually pay taxes. These are things that sort of curdled in a lot of people's mouths. But I was always unsure why she appeared to be so singled out for, as if the author of like what has been a 25 or 30 year tendency, not just in governing DC, but in governing most American big cities.
I think it's an astute point, and but it nonetheless affects her legacy. It's she, as I said, she will be remembered, I think, for overseeing this great period of growth, a lot of which was out of her hands, some of which was in her hands. I mean, look, the pandemic disrupted a tremendous amount of this, and you can't put that on her. She certainly managed aspects of it in good ways. I think all of us who lived through COVID can remember that the city's response to COVID was in many ways quite good. It was very easy to get tests. The city would put out a lot of numbers.
Well, and my kids were out of school for like a year and a half, which was ridiculous.
Exactly. So it's and all of this comes with double-edged swords. Schools are another really important, factor, ones that I'm certain will point to as part of her legacy of saying, we've invested more in public schools. We've seen huge improvements among urban school districts. DC is certainly up there for, how our test scores are improved, but you still get those, but that people raised when Fenty was pressing for mayoral control of schools back in the day, which is, you're still not seeing the kind of attendance numbers that you'd like to be. You're still seeing schools east of the river, in particular, in disinvested areas that aren't doing as well as they could be. And that this is a legacy of the work to allow the charter sector to have more power, to build up more charter schools in the city and pull students out of the traditional public system. Again, not anything different from Tony Williams, from Adrian Fenty, even from Vince Gray to an extent. So, do you ding her for that? Or do you say, she didn't change anything? It wasn't, she kept sort of things moving the way they were? Or do you say, well, she got the good with the bad? It's kind of a mixed bag, in my opinion.
Okay, well, speaking of her legacy, I think the thing that I'm going to take away, maybe it's recency bias, is the whole dance with Trump. We have to talk about it. We talked earlier about how, she has a young daughter. It just, there's a war weariness that, boy, don't I get that. But how much of this do you think is really about what we've all just gone through in the city when it comes to Trump?
Yeah, I mean, this is, for better or worse, going to be, one of the first things people talk about when they remember her legacy, because she had to deal with Trump twice, right? And the first time around, she is able to, at some points be much more, pugnacious, sort of fighting with him, sparring with him on Twitter. That was helped by the fact that Democrats had control of Congress, or at least partial control of Congress for part of the time. But this most recent, year or so since Trump has been back in office, when exact same situation as 2016, yet you see Trump much more focused on the city, and therefore Bowser much more feeling like she has to accommodate him, whether that's ripping out Black Lives Matter Plaza, which pretty much nobody liked, but she felt was a necessary move to sort of ward off additional interference. And then, all of her additional moves to go to the White House, to rub elbows, with some people that I'm sure she'd rather not be, in the hopes of, appeasing the administration. I think that is all going to be read, with a very mixed bag in the wake of all of this, because look, she may have prevented the absolute worst, which is Trump and the Republicans moving to fully rescind our limited self-government here. But the one thing that they always said they wanted to prevent was Trump taking control of the police department. Well, that happened this summer. We saw a tremendous surge of federal troops who are, by and large, still in the city. There are persistent questions about how much they are still working our police with immigration enforcement, a thing that the mayor has said she does not want, and yet seemingly has not been able to stop in any meaningful way, even though it outrages pretty much everybody in this city. That's going to become a huge part of her legacy, fairly or unfairly. Her hands are tied in many ways, but I think a lot of people wanted to see her, even if it's symbolically, standing up, making it clear that she did not want this. And, through the Post's recent reporting on this, we've learned that she felt like she had to do this through various agreements she struck with the president. But I think some people are going to look at it and say, would he have responded to strength better than these efforts to accommodate him? I mean, you saw, I think, Zoran Mondani, the mayor-elect in New York, meeting with him, refusing to, disavow calling him a fascist. And what does Trump do? But, if this guy's a winner, he's smiling, he does nothing but like him. I think
went out
maybe
and bought the
there's
same outfit that the guy wears.
Yeah, I think there's some lessons there, and or at the very least representing kind of a counterfactual for how this year could have gone down. And that's going to be part of her legacy.
I don't know if I mean, I guess the answer, like you're saying, is compared to what, and I don't know that Mamdani has is that illustrative of it. He's not in office yet. He has actually won a great victory despite Trump campaigning against him. I think Bowser but from the reporting that I've read, and we just had Jonathan O'Connell on the pod who did that enormous piece in the Post about like what was really happening between Bowser and the Trump administration during the police takeover. That the interpersonal relationship's been pretty good. I guess we're about to have a new mayor, so there'll be a chance to sort of road test some other possible, postures towards Trump. But the people who've sort of dinged her for a lack of giving him the finger. They've not. I've never heard a convincing sort of counterfactual of like, oh, this is what would have happened. Even though people, including me, have said like it would be a lot more satisfying, and sometimes it seems like, I wrote this that she gave everything, every possible thing a blue mayor could give a MAGA president, and got kicked in the teeth anyway.
Yeah, and I think you're seeing some of that in the early response from the people who will likely run to replace her, of what they think this could look like. As you say, we're still kind of, they're fuzzy on the details because, of course, they're not running yet. But the most likely people to run to replace her, Ward 4 Councilmember Janice Lewis-George and at-large Councilmember Kenyon McDuffie. McDuffie, in particular, just came on the Politics Hour a few weeks ago. And even though he agrees with Mayor Bowser on a good many things, you saw him being very clear. The cooperation with ICE and immigration authorities, that is like a step too far for him. And he was really making a point to say, do we have to communicate with ICE? Yes. Do we have to fully cooperate with them such that they are on patrol with MPD, even in this moment when Trump does not control the police department? No. And I found it really striking that he was using this as sort of the way to differentiate them. This felt like his, line to say, hey, do you like business-friendly policies and, a friendliness towards development and sports teams? Do you want Muriel Bowser without the cooperation of ICE? Well, then I'm your guy. And I think that is the kind of distinction that you'll see people drawing, is what are the things that DC can do to stave off the worst, and what is reacting before the worst has happened. Because this is what it comes down to, that anyone who's watching Congress will want to talk about, is what is truly the threat of the worst beyond what we've already seen happening. Is Congress going to take the extra step of rescinding home rule? They talk about it, they pass anti-home rule bills, but to go the extra mile really takes quite an additional step. And, they're not exactly the most functional body anyway. So I think it's a real question for whoever wants to replace the mayor to answer, which is, how far are you willing to go? What do you think you can get away with that will not trigger Republicans in Congress to take that step, particularly if they lose control in the midterms?
I want to talk about that because am I alone here in thinking that being the mayor of DC has got to be one of the most miserable jobs to have on the face of the planet? Tell me about the band of masochists who might want to throw their hat into the running for the world's worst job, in my opinion.
Right. So you've got it's like responsibility without authority.
Yes.
And that is that's the worst thing about the way home rule is structured, in that it provides an excuse for DC. So any number of failures of city government can be excused, sometimes accurately, by saying "boo-hoo, we don't get to do a commuter tax," or "boo," and again, these excuses are sometimes valid, but they're still excuses, and it must be incredibly frustrating. I think you've got the two people Alex mentioned as likely candidates, Kenyon McDuffie, who I think would try to put back together the sort of centrist, market-friendly, business-friendly coalition that elected Bowser, and that before Bowser elected her mentor, Adrian Fenty, and before Fenty had elected Tony Williams, and has basically had dominated mayoral politics in Washington for the 21st century. And then Janice Lewis-George, who represents Ward 4, what friend of CityCast, Jeanette Dill, has reported is sort of dreaming of a Mamdani-style campaign of activating a lot of young people, heavy social media presence, and unapologetic democratic socialist politics. I think, look at what DC, for all of its blue reputation, has typically elected centrists to the mayor's office, and that includes Barry when he first ran. I don't know that it's a foregone conclusion that happens again. And I think we're sort of at this low trust moment in American life. And the thing about a candidate who is a committed ideologue or a committed member of I'm a democratic socialist or whatever, is that people know that this person at least believes in something. And that is, for some people, a very comforting thing. And in a way that it's much harder for someone who's a centrist to pull that off. And what I think one of the things Mamdani had that impressed Trump is the sense that he was elected with a mandate. This group of people have given him a specific set of tasks, and he better do them. And it's much harder for sort of a centrist to follow a centrist with like a sense of like clear mandate for something, compared to someone who's a leftist, or for that matter, a rightist, or a somethingist.
Yeah, and Louis George, I think, yes, she ran with the support of Democratic Socialists. She's not going to shy away from that in this race. I think one of her greatest strengths is that she can speak very confidently about what she believes in. When you heard her, I think in her last race, when many of the mayor's supporters, people who were a little more moderate, backed a candidate against her, basically on a tough on crime, Janice Louis George is going to defund the police kind of, rhetoric. I think other candidates might have tried to retreat from some of that. And you saw her really stand firm, cite the memory of things that were happening in 2020 and what police reform means in the city. She speaks, very eloquently about it. And that's the crucial thing, is it's less ideological with her and more her unwillingness to back down in the face of some of these attacks, which is why you saw her being willing to be one of the few people voting against a lot of the tough on crime legislation to pass over the past few years. I think some people are seeing this as a liability for her, and it could be, but the key will be whether someone like a McDuffie can effectively use that to attack her. McDuffie is, he's been turning more to the right on some of these criminal justice issues in the past, but historically, this is a guy who backed the NEAR Act, which is one of the biggest police reforms passed in the city's history. He's been a big supporter of violence interrupters. It's not like a one-to-one thing. And that's why this will end up being a really interesting race if it is just the two of them. And for the record, I've heard it may not be. I think that a lot of people broadly aligned with the mayor in the Green team, they may have formed strategic alliances with Kenyon McDuffie. He was running against Alyssa Silverman, pretty much the council member that they hate the most last time around. But they disagree on some things. And I think crucially, there's some interpersonal conflicts there that suggest that they're not 100% thrilled with him as a candidate. If we're in a world where we have ranked choice voting, and we may very well be for the mayoral race, that opens the door to more than just, a heads up race. Maybe other candidates want to try and take a crack at this. It wouldn't surprise me, even though there is not a clear answer as to who that would be as of yet.
I don't know, man. I think even that you're defining left versus right, the issue you're citing here, and I know it's not the only one you would cite, but is stance on police reform, seems like a sign of how weak that is in Washington. The success of Mamdani, I think, is because he promised people that he would change the material conditions of their life, the size of their bank account, the comfort of their life, and as much as policing and police misconduct drives passions, it is different than saying like, I'm going to cap your rent or whatnot. And he really branded himself on the materialist stuff, not on the quote unquote culture war stuff.
And I think that will almost certainly be the basis of this campaign that she's gearing up to run. Look, you could essentially rerun the promises that he made, right? Freeze the rent. Janice Louis George, among other politicians in the city, have been big boosters of expanding rent control and, doing things to make a difference for the price of housing in the city. Fast and free buses. DC had a plan to make buses free. It never went ahead, in part due to the mayor and Metro's opposition to the idea. And free childcare. The city has made steps to expand free childcare. Who has been, out there trying to push for the expansion of that program more than Janice Louis George in these last few years? She's been part of the block of council members doing it. She could essentially copy and paste this, policy platform if she wants to.
Well, right, but so this is the part of the debate where if Bowser were mayor, she would say, "But we ain't got no money for that."
Absolutely. But is that as fun and exciting a message for young people?
Of course
no.
Not.
And so it's hard to be that person. Even if you're right, it's hard to make that case.
Yep.
Let me ask you this. What does the council look like now after all of this? This is probably going to switch up so much.
Yeah, this is going to completely scramble things. I am hearing that Anita Bonds, the at-large council member, has been thinking about retiring. And without the mayor running, one of her closest political allies, I think that those rumors will only intensify, in the near future here. If McDuffie does run, he would have to almost certainly drop out or essentially resign from office. He's an independent right now, and because of some very old rules about DC's council, there have to be a certain number of non-Democrats on the council. And so if he were to run as a Democrat, that would trigger his necessary resignation. Not even should he win, just if he runs in the Democratic primary, he'd need to change his party registration. So that's a few openings right there, to say nothing of the fact that the Ward 1 seat's coming open with Brianne Nadeau retiring. You could see another council seat come open because Ward 2 council member Brooke Pinto and at-large council member Robert White are both running for the delegate seat. Those are two people, shall we say, who have been mentioned in mayoral conversations in the past. Pretty much everybody thought Robert White was going to run this time until he switched to the delegate race. Could he pivot back? People have talked about Pinto in this lane as kind of Bowser's, closest ally on the council other than Bonds. Could she run? I don't know, but people are talking about it. It is going to be a very interesting election season beyond just a mayoral race. But certainly Bowser's decision has ripple effects throughout all the rest of every race we're looking at here.
In the next 12 months, Bowser still will be mayor. And this would be the moment for a lot of elected officials to be like, all right, what are you going to do now that you don't need to go back to voters anymore, now that you can sort of say F you to everyone involved? I don't know if that's actually a good question with Bowser, because she has, as you said, been a fairly insular figure and kind of done what she's going to do anyway. So what do you guys see the next year as holding?
Well, she's going to have to set another very politically unpopular budget before she gets out of here. As things stand right now, because DC has to budget into the future beyond just, this year, that would mean a big cut in spending on schools, which is something that no politician wants to touch. Who wants to cut schools? But that is, of course, one of the biggest money drivers in DC. It would not surprise me if she tries to make some of these politically unpalatable decisions about trying to control spending on schools, something that, she has made some steps towards doing in the past, but it's such a third rail. Who wants to touch that? You're not running for re-election. I mean, maybe that's easier to do, set the next mayor up for a little more success, perhaps. But I don't know. I mean, she's, believe me, I wouldn't want to do it. And the fact that she's accomplished so much leaves her without any big wish lists, other than, some people have said to me that she really wants to get RFK as locked in as it can possibly be, right? It passed the council, but she wants to see it, really taking some concrete steps towards actually building the thing, such that there can be no, last minute intervention from anybody with ideas, that this thing is locked in by the time she leaves office so she can show up in a couple of years to cut the ribbon.
So what's a former mayor of DC to do? If this was a state, right, you'd think, oh, she's had a successful 12 years as mayor. She can run for Senate. She can run for governor. Like that, none of that's in the cards.
Another reason why the job is bad. No way to get promoted.
Only a masochist would want this job.
What is the, based on her predecessors, what kind of things can you do now?
Yeah, I think a lot of people are looking at a lobbying job of some kind, right? It would be very beneficial for some big law firm, to have someone who knows how DC works. She does have some relationships on the Hill. It's not impossible to imagine her going to see, work for Beverly Perry, her close advisor who just took a lobbying gig a few months ago. That's certainly a possibility. As I mentioned, look at someone like Tony Williams, who's running the federal city council, big business developer lobby. She's been very key on many huge development projects in the city. Does she want to do something like that? I think she could. You could even imagine, maybe Democrats win back the White House. She's been on the short list before for a couple presidents or potential presidents for cabinet posts. Maybe she's hoping for something like that. But there is no easy answer. Certainly she's close with the Michael Bloomberg world. He controls a variety of foundations and such. You could get a job doing that. Adrian Fenty, we've mentioned him. He works in Silicon Valley. Maybe she wants a job, in venture capital, something like that. There's no perfect answer. I think if there was, you would have seen her a little less conflicted about all this. But I think she's got options. I think she'll have a lot of people who are looking to hire her. As you alluded to, she's still young. So she can, I think, take a little time and figure out what she wants to do. And I doubt we will have heard the last of her in any capacity in DC. We'll see her around somewhere, even if it's just at swanky cocktail parties.
We were all at an event recently where the mayor was there, and one of the journalists that spoke said something, boy, Muriel Bowser, she's somebody who could really take a punch. And that something about that sticks with me when I'm thinking about her legacy in DC as mayor. For a lot of people in DC, I bet she's the only mayor that they remember, that they don't remember Fenty, they don't remember Gray. I think that comment really, when I think of Bowser, I do think that she's someone like, we were talking to Seagraves after the whole Trump takeover stuff, and he was talking about how somebody asked, how does it feel to be dealing with this? And she said, I don't think anybody's worried about the way that I feel about any of this. And I do think, I don't blame her for maybe just saying enough is enough.
I gotta say, I always say this, and it sounds mean, but I don't actually mean it this way. She is the most boring public official I've ever covered. And I think given the state of Washington and this incredibly wrenching change from being Chocolate City to not being Chocolate City, the transformation of neighborhoods, the sense of like anxiety, insecurity, worry, rage, whatever that this may spark, her sort of affect has been like oil on the water. A lot of people in a lot of different moments that we've talked about might have played to the gallery. Leon says you want him to leave town. Well, F you, that guy hasn't done that. That's not her move, for better or worse. And there's times when I think everybody would like it to be her move, but it hasn't been. And I think, in this case, we reporters, we love covering an interesting, colorful rogue, which was sort of how Barry's legacy went down. But I think the boringness was kind of the superpower,
Yeah, you talk to a lot of people who actually know her, who actually speak to her, and they'll say she's funny, she's sarcastic, has a wry sense of humor. You wouldn't know it if you sat through a single press conference with her where she just normally looks like she would rather crawl out of her skin than be there. Another reason that I think that she'll be thrilled not to have this job anymore. And she has a thin skin despite her outward presentation. She takes these slights very personally and will let you know about them
she can take a punch, but not
opportunity. Yeah. And so I think that it is fascinating because she has these multiple sides. Why does she feel like she can't show it? I think there's something to be said for not wanting to be perceived as the angry Black woman, right? And I think that she's sensitive to how she'd be attacked. Maybe with this last month of freedom here, we'll get to see a little more of the real Muriel Bowser, but I'm not holding my breath. As you say, boring is kind of the name of the game with her. And we're in for a very different era without boring old Muriel Bowser to kick around anymore.
Alex, awesome to see you. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Happy Thanksgiving.
Bridget, happy Thanksgiving to you too, my friend.
Happy Thanksgiving, Mike. I will talk to you soon.
You know it. And that's all for today here on CityCast DC. If you enjoyed the show, why not tell a friend, rate the show, leave us a review, and subscribe to our morning newsletter. We will be back Monday morning after Thanksgiving with more news from around the city. I hope you have a great Thanksgiving. Bye.